Thank you for joining us for this week's podcast. In this episode, we continue our conversation of God as creator of heaven and earth and why that is such a central claim to the Christian faith. But sort of also going back to the value of the material world, the physical, reality. We also have this belief in the church that God created ex nihilo, which is just Latin for God created out of nothing, which in the ancient world was not an idea that people had. So the ancient view of cosmology, almost anywhere you find it, but especially in the ancient Near East, just very briefly, was this idea that there always was some kind of material existence. It was very chaotic. It was not formed at all. And you actually have an allusion to this in Genesis 1, that, the earth is void, it's formless. And that's sort of how they viewed the universe before it was formed. Even the word that's used in the beginning, God created. That word "created" is in the Hebrew language is not really a concept of God creates out of nothing. It's like sort of God fashioned the universe out of what was already there. And that is how the ancient world saw things. But when the Christian church began to explore what it believed and the significance of it, they sort of out of that developed this idea of God created ex nihilo. But it's not like they just sort of out of the blue said, yeah, let's just say God created out of nothing. Like there is a deep significance to that. And so I guess with that, I'll sort of hand it over to you, Britt, because you are much better at this, I think, than I am.
I don't know if that's true. No, I think it's fair. The reason we're bringing this up is that this is actually a big part of church history about ex nihilo. What's going to happen over the next couple thousand years from when the Apostles' Creed's written through the Middle Ages, all the way up until, honestly, all the way up until like modern times when Big Bang cosmology, when the Big Bang theory was actually invented. There's a joke, and this will make sense when I explain the rest of it, that when scientists discovered the Big Bang, they finally climbed a mountain and they found a bunch of theologians sitting there. That's a playful illustration to say simply this, that for the thousands of years prior, we think about this, we had no real proof or evidence, just a suspicion that the earth kind of came out of nowhere. And remember, during this time, we don't have the same ideas of like ecology and like living green and sustainable. Like those weren't thoughts that we were thinking because that science wasn't available. So things like the Industrial Revolution, where we're pumping out massive amounts of pollution, like, well, who cares? It's eternal anyway, or it could be eternal. Who knows? Doesn't matter, right? It's not important. That's not the discussion at hand here, right?
Yeah.
And going all the way back, especially in the Middle Ages, they were having this fight of like, is matter and eternal? The Gnostics were teaching that there had been these like multiple gods, and one like had been created by the one, and he created the material world because he was trying to be like the one and wasn't the one. And we're getting into really weird language because it's a really weird story and it really doesn't make a lot of sense. But the idea was that this planet is eternal, but it's eternal bad, right? So when we talk about ex nihilo, it's really important because it's an affirmation of cosmology that can be, I think, really, really supported by our scientific discoveries, and kind of helps us understand like what it means to be the theologian sitting at the top of that mountain, right? Like we've understood like who the creator is, like who the master of the universe is, who the real producer of all this is, right? And I think that's the important that we're trying to get. Like ex nihilo shows the power of God, right? And that he was eternal and always is and will be, and then created this space as well and breathed it out and pushed it out into existence for his own reason. We've kind of talked a little bit about that. Do you think, is that what you're hoping to get at, Ben? I was reading your notes and I want to make sure I'm hitting all the points when we were going through this for our study.
Yeah, like it definitely shows the power of God that he creates out of nothing. But it also sort of addresses an issue of if matter was always there. I mean, essentially, if matter was also co-eternal with God, that actually creates a lot of issues.
It really does.
Yeah, because something that is eternal, like that is a quality of that entity or whatever you want to call it. Like God is eternal. But God does not get his eternal quality from something else. That is just something that is a part of him. But if matter is also eternal, then that means that there is something else out there besides God that is able to have these qualities. So that actually makes God not the ultimate source of any eternal nature. So it just sort of creates this, I don't know, sort of theological conundrum, I guess, of if there is something that is co eternal with God, then it actually reduces God's power just by the logical fact that there is something that exists with the
Yeah.
same quality that God has that is separate from God,
Yeah.
um, which is a huge issue. But and you can't also say so. So that's a reason why uh, material substance can't coexist with God because it then it's at odds with who God is. But also, you can't say that matter is eternal as an aspect of who God is, because then you get into panentheism, that God is actually present within creation. Like the tree is a part of God, like literally a part of God, and
Yeah.
that's obviously there's a lot of issues there, because then you end up sort of worshiping creation rather than the Creator. Uh, and it also creates the issue I put in here. We talked about an infinite regress, that is
Mhm.
a logical impossibility. Like you cannot keep going back and saying, well, this was caused by this, was caused by this, was caused by this, and go to like the beginning of creation and just keep doing that over and over again. Like that is a logical impossibility. We know from science that in the universe everything has an origin somewhere, which is how the idea of Big Bang developed.
Yeah.
Was they realized that, and some other parts of it too, like the expansion of the universe, and they said it has to have a source, and so that's where the Big Bang idea came from. Well, if matter is eternal, then all that does is create an issue of, so what was the ultimate source of it then?
Yeah.
Which you just sort of go back to the whole confusion of, well, then I guess matter itself is eternal, so it has this godlike aspect. So then it just breaks down. Like it actually does not make sense.
Yeah.
And the reason I touch on this, it might seem very strange that we're talking about this. Just like, okay, what is the point here? But I've actually heard, and I talked with Jordan about this before we started. I've actually heard like pastors and church leaders, and theologians like discussing this as like a possible legitimate thing that the church can hold, that matter is actually eternal, like going back to like how we are sort of rediscovering the ancient worldviews and the ancient beliefs of how the universe was and how it functioned. And and they said, one of the views that they had was that, matter was always eternal, and that God created order out of chaos, which is a wonderful thing. And I'm like, yeah, like that's a great theological point, that God can create order out of chaos. But that's taking it a bit too far and saying, well, we see that idea represented in the ancient views of cosmology and the ancient views of the universe. So why don't we just adapt those views and say, yeah, God did, just come upon this eternal creation and that was chaotic, and then he just sort of ordered it. Um, I mean, that's I don't know the right idiom to use. Not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's sort of taking the bathwater with the baby, I guess. Sort of like the opposite of that. Like,
Yeah.
why do we have to take on these ancient views of cosmology that are actually very harmful theologically just because there might be an idea present in them that sounds good?
Yeah.
I mean, and in the long term, that really just breaks down because the ancient views also said that the Earth was flat and it actually rested on literal uh, rock pillars, and that the starry sky is actually in a vast ocean of chaotic waters, and that's actually what rain is. It's sort of like water breaking into this bubble of space that we live in. So I'm like, okay, so I mean that's just stupid on the face of it, right? Like we're just gonna pick and choose these ideas. I know I'm going on a tangent here, but just to illustrate, like these ideas are kind of resurfacing here and there,
Yeah.
and it's very strange. And so that's why I'm sort of hitting on why it's important that we believe that God created out of nothing, uh, because like there is a very good reason why we have that view. I don't know
Well,
if you want to add anything else to that.
I will say I did a little digging on this, and there are variations of this belief. Like the cosmology is kind of coming back with some New Age thought. but also
Mhm.
like on a much more dangerous radical note. And again, I said this last pod, I don't think any of you guys are going to join a cult, but just so you're aware, this is something that some cults do affirm. So maybe be
Yeah.
aware, like, hey, maybe they're using language that isn't so great for a reason. Just something to keep in mind. I know that's a
Yeah.
silly way to illustrate it, but I have points with this. But Ben, I want to go back to something you said on a more serious, well, semi-serious note. So you're
Yeah.
telling me that Earth is not on the back of a giant turtle swimming in space?
I know. My world was blown up when I first heard that.
Yeah.
It's
If you're a
crazy.
basketball fan, Ben just ruined Kyrie Irving's day. Big.
Ugh.
I don't know you're an NBA guy, but Kyrie Irving's an NBA player that's like tweets all the time about the Earth being flat. Um,
Ah.
I don't. No one knows if he really believes it at this point. It's probably a troll, but it's still really funny.
Yeah. Sorry. Well, that was a Native American view, wasn't it? That's the name of a book,
Yeah.
also, isn't it?
So yeah,
The Earth on a Turtle's Back or something like that. I remember reading that in school.
yeah.
Um, which, yeah, all
Interestingly,
right. Well,
the Kyrie Irving
yeah,
NBA guy, he joined a Native American tribe and then started tweeting the conspiracy theories about the Earth being flat. So I'm not saying that those two are related. I just it's kind of a funny little coincidence. I really don't know what the order of those events were, but
yeah, yeah,
it's out there, people. Is what I'm saying, and even famous, very wealthy, successful people can think about it and really consider it.
yeah. And I guess sort of on a tangent with all this, I know a lot of people view the church as like being against science, especially when it comes to cosmology, because the whole Galileo thing.
Absolutely
I
not.
just want to say the reason Galileo was treated the way he was not because of his views on cosmology. It was because of political issues with the Pope.
Yeah.
So, like, the church did not have issues with his findings. Maybe some individual people might have, but just as a side note.
Yeah, up in for a large portion of church history, popes have kind of done some pretty crazy stuff and have really kind of not been great to Christianity historically. So
Yeah,
if we're knocking popes, this is not anti-Catholic. I love Catholic people. I actually in college had a copy of the Catholic Catechism in my room that I read and referenced weekly. That's not a joke. That's a true story.
I did not know you had a copy of it. I knew you referenced it. I just didn't know you had a copy. That's
Yeah.
funny.
Well, technically it was my roommate's copy, but I used it.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Rick might be on this podcast, right?
Yeah, that's true. I'm yeah, why not?
So little
Um,
teaser trailer.
yeah, yeah.
Go
Richard
ahead.
Briggs is a phenomenal philosopher, genius.
Yeah.
I always looked up to him. Same with you, Britt. I mean, you two, like, you would have conversations that were way over my head. I knew just enough to sound like I wasn't a total idiot.
Yeah.
Um,
So I won't
but
do the I'm not going to get into it. I don't think that's the case, man. I work in finance now, so let's not act like I'm some brilliant thinker. I had this podcast because my hobby is still reading like really really high end religious nerd books, either biblical history, languages, or interpretations of the word, or just history of the church. So that's why I'm on this podcast, is because I have a hobby and I have no outlet for it.
yeah, it's fine. Uh, I appreciate that. We
I
all
got to
appreciate
cut all
that.
this out of the podcast. I feel
Yeah.
bad for you listeners today. I'm so sorry, dudes. Like and gals, you guys are you don't deserve it.
Yeah, hopefully you enjoy it. All right, so the last point I want to touch on is it's not really connected to the last one, but it is important that God made creation for us. And like we were made for creation, which I know on the face of it might sound very strange. Like, yes, we were made to worship God, but we were made to worship God by how we lived in his creation. Like the first thing that humans did after God made them was to be stewards of the garden. Which I mean, that's just how it was. That sort of laid out the relationship that we were supposed to have with the universe. Essentially, is that we are the stewards of it. We're connected to creation, like we understand it also. Like we are able to comprehend natural laws. We are able to understand the way the universe works, like in very abstract ways too. Like, and I mean abstract in terms of how on earth could we even possibly understand this? Like to the point where we can point a telescope at a distant planet, and by the shade of color that is reflected back, we can understand the elemental structure of its atmosphere. Like stuff like that. Like that we can just understand is just crazy. but like we can do that because we were made in this creation to think this way. Like we were made to think logically. I remember one time, Brett, a long time ago, you and I had a conversation, and I don't know how we got on the topic. But we were talking about the concept of hell and what hell would be like, and I think one of us said
Wow.
uh,
Yep.
that I really feel like hell is just chaos, like where nothing makes sense, like where sometimes like sometimes water boils at a certain temperature, sometimes it doesn't, sometimes fire makes things freeze rather than burns, and sometimes like stuff like that I feel is like the worst existence to be in, where just nothing makes sense, because like humans are made to be logical and to process things, and the most stressful place anyone can be is when we don't understand what's going on,
Yeah.
because chaos is not a part of like how we are made. um, but also part of why we're made for creation is because it is logical, which I think Dinesh D'Souza, who's a kind of a Christian apologist but also an American historian, um, I think he sort of touches on that. That is kind of a part of the spark of the divine, sort of the image of God, that we were made to comprehend His creation, um, because it's a reflection of Him. But sort of going on, but also the reason that I'm saying this is like we are connected inherently to creation. Like we are also physical material. We interact with creation on that level, and we require sustenance that's gained from creation. Like we require water, we require like food, um, to live, and like that's how we're made. Like that is intentional. Like we were intentionally made that way. It's not like we were made to not eat, like just the way our bodies are made. Like we're supposed to do that. Like that is a part of what it is. So eating is actually an act of worship, along with sleep, which I find to be awesome, because I love that. But it also reminds me of a story I wanted to tell. So I had a coworker a while back who was sort of being discipled by my boss at the time. And my boss at the time had some very strange theology. So anyway, so we encouraged my coworker to go on a fast. And like the work that we did was pretty physically intensive. So I thought it was interesting. He says, "Oh, like go on a fast. Like don't eat food, like only drink water, like stuff like that." Which I thought was a really bad idea for what we did. So we started doing that, and then I overheard a conversation of them one day, and my coworker, who was fasting, said, "Yeah, one of the things I'm learning is that I really don't need that stuff, like to live, like food." I was like, "What?" Okay, obviously
Come
that,
again?
yeah. So that was something, yeah. And I'm not dissing him in any way. Like this was something new that he was exploring, the concept of fasting and what it was. So I'm not saying he was an idiot. Uh, I'm just saying that that sort of illustrates sometimes the view that we can kind of have, that we actually don't have an innate, inherent connection to creation. Like oh, this is all just unnecessary fluff. Like we don't really need this. Like we just need to, have a relationship with God, and that's true. Like for our spiritual natures, and partly for our physical natures. But like the universe is not bad. The universe is intentional. Like we were made to live here, which also goes into how we understand, eschatology, the study of last things, study of end times. And I know you've already touched on this. That creation is good, and we are made for it. Like this is where we are made to live. I know there's a song that says, "This isn't my home. I'm just passing through." Um, in the spiritual sense, yes. Like we do talk about the world as like a negative thing, but we just mean that as a reference to sin and the fallen nature of creation. But we don't mean that in a reference to this physical material plane, if you don't mind my saying that. Like this, if I could say it, like this actually is our home. Like this world is our home. This is because we were made here. We were made to care for this. Like this is where we were placed. Like God placed Adam in the garden, and that was supposed to be his eternal dwelling place, was in God's creation, certainly in full fellowship with God. But like I even put a quote here from the Nicene Creed, which sort of on the same section sort of expands on it. "We believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, of all that is seen and unseen." Which again, like what you said last time, like God is the creator of both the spiritual existence of things, but also the physical existence of things, and it was all made good. So to summarize that point, like we were made for this creation, and so it's not a bad thing to actually care about it and to enjoy living here. Uh,
Beautiful
I don't
stuff.
really have a way to tie that off, but there it is.
No, it's not. It's not. I think that ties itself though. Like it's a bow that's magic, man. Because like it's true. Like we're really kind of keen and we want to lock in this point. Like if you're taking things out of today, take that last point away. Like we're talking about God as creator of heaven and the earth, right? And it's the proper place like of just kind of illustrating the biblical worldview of where humans interact with the world, like what God's intention for it was. And so when we went through all these points, some of them were relevant to the history of why this was put in the creed, but the creed also was having a separate intention, right? It was to illustrate what the biblical text and what the church was teaching, and that's what we're teaching, and that's what we're trying to reinforce today. Is that everything you just said, especially in the last point? But I really love that. I really love that idea. Um, of just kind of putting man in its proper place and really understanding creation and our relationship
Mhm.
to it, because I think it makes it more real and vibrant. All the stuff we've been talking about, you know.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I whenever it comes up, I try to hit it hard because like it is an important one that I think it's sort of tossed aside. Um, and like creation just sort of gets taken for granted. Like it actually makes me sad to hear people talk about how dismissive they are towards like their attitude of creation, because it's like really like the entire life that you have known up to this point has been lived here, and it's like you don't even care about the context of where you've lived. Yeah, it's just bizarre to me.
Yeah,
um,
I keep thinking, what's the point, man? I think it's crazy. Like,
yeah,
but
very
yeah.
strange.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. We hope you enjoyed our discussion and found it encouraging and edifying. If you want to connect with us, find us on Facebook or check out emdcampusministry.org to support the ministry. Thanks very much, guys.